The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban street as Mia lit the last candle on the dinner table. The air smelled of garlic bread and marinara sauce, comfort food for a quiet family night. Her two teenage boys, Ethan and Caleb, were still outside, laughing and dribbling a basketball in the driveway, their shoes squeaking against the concrete. Then came the knock. Not a polite tap or a friendly ring. Bang, bang, bang. Mia froze, hand halfway to the drawer for napkins. That knock didn't belong in this neighborhood. It was heavy, impatient, and sharp enough to cut through her calm like a knife. She stepped slowly toward the front door, peeking through the peephole, and her heart stuttered. Two uniformed police officers stood on her porch, one with a hand on his belt, the other holding a notepad. Their faces were blank, professional, not friendly. Mia opened the door a crack. "Good evening, officers. Can I help you?" The taller one spoke. "Are you the guardian of Ethan and Caleb Reyes?" She nodded, throat tight. "Yes. What's going on?" "We've received a report from a neighbor, Ms. Karen Alder," he said, glancing at his notes. "She's alleging that your sons trespassed on her property, vandalized her garden, and possibly damaged her vehicle." Mia blinked. What? That can't be right. They've been in the driveway all afternoon." The shorter officer looked toward the driveway where the boys had stopped playing, basketball resting between them. They looked frozen in time, faces pale, eyes wide. Caleb was only 13. Ethan, 15. Neither had ever spoken to the police before, let alone been accused of a crime. "Ma'am, we need to ask them a few questions," the taller officer said, stepping forward. "Wait." Mia raised a hand, her voice suddenly firm. "I'd like to know exactly what was reported, and if she provided any evidence." The officers exchanged a look. The shorter one cleared his throat. "She submitted a photo. It shows your sons near her yard. There's also damage to a ceramic figure and scratches on her car." Mia's heart raced now, not with fear, but with a rising fire of something else. Something wasn't right. "We have cameras," she said. "Front yard, side gate, and driveway. I'll pull the footage." The officers hesitated, then nodded. That would be helpful. As they waited, Mia walked calmly, too calmly, into the living room. Her hands trembled as she opened the security app on her phone. She didn't just hope her boys were innocent. She knew, and she was going to prove it. Outside, Karen watched from behind her curtain, a smirk playing at her lips. She had no idea what was coming. Because Mia wasn't just a protective mother. She was the wife of the man who trained half the officers in the precinct. And Karen had just made the worst mistake of her life. Karen Alder's house sat 2 doors down, white picket fence, rose bushes trimmed to perfection, and a gnome in the front garden that looked like it wanted to escape. To the average neighbor, she was polite, charming even. But behind closed doors and HOA meetings, she was a simmering volcano of complaints, fake smiles, and quiet threats. And now she had drawn Mia's children into her twisted little fantasy. Inside Mia's living room, the tension crackled like static. She replayed the footage from her front camera, eyes narrowing. There were Ethan and Caleb, never leaving the driveway, never even glancing in Karen's direction. The timestamps were crystal clear. So how had Karen come up with her evidence? Mia's phone buzzed, a neighborhood group chat notification. She opened it and stared. Karen had posted a blurry screenshot of Ethan dribbling the basketball, cropped to make it look like he was at the edge of her yard. Her caption read, "Caught them red-handed, again. I've had enough. Next stop, charges." Mia's blood ran cold, not from fear, but from rage. The kind of rage only a mother feels when someone targets her kids on purpose. She tapped the screen again, zooming into the photo. Something was off. Karen had intentionally blurred the background, but Mia spotted it. Her own mailbox still visible in the corner of the frame. Proof that the boys were nowhere near Karen's property. A chill ran down Mia's spine. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a setup. She called out, "Boys, come inside." Now, the officers had stepped away to take a phone call, probably updating dispatch, but Mia knew this wasn't going to be solved with polite conversation. Not anymore. "Mom," Ethan said nervously, "are we in trouble?" She looked at her sons, then back at the phone. Not even close, but Karen is about to be. Outside, Karen watched from behind her curtains, sipping tea with that smug little grin. The kind of look that said she thought she'd won. She believed the uniformed presence would scare the boys, shame the family, make them shrink in the eyes of the neighborhood. What she didn't know was this wasn't Mia's first time staring down chaos. What she didn't realize was who Mia was married to. Maya took a breath and walked back to the officers, phone in hand. "I've reviewed the footage. My sons didn't step off our driveway. And I believe Ms. Alder submitted doctored photos to support a false accusation." The taller officer straightened slightly, eyes alert. "You're sure?" "Very," Maya said, calm and deadly certain. "And I'd like to formally file a counter-complaint. Also, I think you should call your chief before this goes any further." The officers exchanged a glance. "And who should we say is calling?" She smiled. "Tell him it's Mia, his wife." Karen Alder stood smugly at her living room window, teacup in hand, her curtain just wide enough to peer through. Her eyes flicked toward Mia's house, the squad car, the officers, the boys looking nervous. It was all going exactly as planned. She took a slow sip. That's what happened when you let children run wild. You taught them a lesson. And if that lesson came with a little humiliation, well, perhaps next time they'd think twice before bouncing that stupid basketball near her property. But then, something shifted. One of the officers was on the phone, his stance suddenly straighter, more rigid. The other turned sharply, eyes scanning the street. And Mia wasn't panicked anymore. She was focused. Karen's brow twitched. That wasn't how people reacted when the police were at their door. Mia wasn't pleading, wasn't flustered. She was composed, confident, and her phone was in her hand like a weapon. Karen's gaze darted toward her security system monitor on the side table. She tapped to rewind her own footage from earlier that day. She always recorded her property. Insurance, she claimed, but she didn't need to review it to remember the show she'd staged. The shattered gnome, the carefully placed rake, the scratches she'd discovered on her own car minutes before dialing 911, and the photo she'd posted in the group chat. She cropped out the fence line on purpose, angled it just so. It wasn't perfect, but it looked close enough. Now, it felt dangerously close to being unraveled. Back across the street, Mia turned her head slowly, locking eyes with Karen through the gap in the curtain. Karen flinched. That wasn't a scared mom. That was a strategist. Suddenly, the same confidence that had fueled Karen all week began to crack. Her smirk faded. Her mind raced. What did Mia have? Footage? Witnesses? Could she really spin this? And then came the true gut punch. The officer who'd been on the phone turned to Mia and asked something. Karen couldn't hear it, but Mia's response chilled her to the bone. She mouthed two words with unmistakable clarity. "My husband." Karen staggered back from the window, her teacup rattling against its saucer. No, 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 no. Her husband. The chief of police. Karen's stomach turned. She grabbed her phone and began furiously deleting the photo from the group chat. She opened her gallery, erased the screenshots, the recordings, anything that might trace back to her. But she knew it was already too late. You can delete files. You can't delete intent. Down the street, Mia's boys were laughing again. Carefree. The officers had already softened. Whatever she'd said had changed the air. Mia wasn't just defending her family anymore. She was preparing to end this. Mia moved through her living room like she was walking into battle, steady, calculated, with her phone held like a blade she was ready to draw. The officers were already shifting. The moment she'd said, "Chief Reyes," their tone had gone from authoritative to cautious. Now they were listening. Really listening. "I have security footage from 3 angles," Maya said. "Driveway, fence line, and front porch. My sons never left our property. And based on the timestamp, Karen's photo was taken when they were mid-game, nowhere near her yard." The taller officer nodded. "We'll need to review the footage." Mia turned the screen toward them and hit play. The footage rolled. Ethan and Caleb passing the ball, laughing, never stepping a foot out of bounds. Karen's house in the background, her porch empty, her gnome intact. Until timestamp 4:47 p.m. Karen emerged, holding something. She bent over in her flowered, then smashed the gnome herself against the fence post. Pieces scattered. She paused, stepped back, examined the angle, and took a photo. The officers stared in silence. One slowly leaned closer. She did it herself. "That's incredibly damaging evidence," the shorter officer said, rubbing the back of his neck. "And those scratches on her car. Did you see anything about that?" Mia nodded. "Actually, yes. Our side camera caught her running a key down her own bumper an hour before she called 911. I have that clip too." The officers were dead silent. And then one of their radios crackled. "Dispatch to Unit 4. Chief Reyes is en route to your location." The tall officer raised an eyebrow at Mia. She just smiled. "I told you he'd want to be here." Outside, Karen was pacing now. Her front door opened. She stepped out onto the porch, arms crossed, trying to reclaim her image of righteous indignation. But her eyes betrayed her. They darted across the street toward Mia's house, toward the cops, toward the closing noose. And then she heard it. The low, authoritative hum of an unmarked black SUV turning into the cul-de-sac. Her blood ran cold. The vehicle rolled to a smooth stop at the curb. Out stepped Chief Daniel Rice, tall, sharply dressed in plain clothes, but carrying a weight of presence that made Karen's breath hitch. He walked calmly up the path toward his home, giving the officers a nod before greeting Mia with a quick kiss on the cheek. Then he turned to the 2 officers. "Brief me," he said. Karen took a step off her porch. "Wait, I didn't know." He held up a hand. "You'll speak when I ask you to." The calm in his voice was worse than yelling, worse than anger. It was judgment, and it was final. Karen stumbled back a step. The trap had been set, and now it had snapped shut. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Chief Daniel Rice stood at the center of the front yard like a storm in human form. Calm skies above, but one wrong move and lightning would strike. His badge wasn't on display, but his authority radiated from every step, every glance. The entire neighborhood could feel the shift in the air. He turned to the officers. "Show me the footage." They handed over Mia's phone. Daniel watched in silence. Karen smashing the gnome, staging the scene, then taking the photo. The next clip showed her casually dragging the key down her own bumper with a fake sigh of frustration and a glance toward Mia's house. Daniel's jaw flexed. When the video ended, he handed the phone back and turned to face Karen. She was now halfway down her porch steps, visibly sweating, her arms hugging herself like a frightened child caught in a lie. "Ms. Alder," Daniel said, voice steady but charged, "you called in a criminal report, claimed 2 minors trespassed and vandalized your property. You submitted photo evidence and gave a verbal statement that this behavior was escalating." Karen nodded shakily. "Yes. Well, that's what I believed happened." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "What you believed, or what you fabricated?" Karen blinked. The entire street had gone quiet. Curtains fluttered. Foams peeked from windows. Maya stood silently by her sons, her hand resting on Caleb's shoulder, as Ethan watched wide-eyed. "Do you wait?" Karen stammered, stepping closer. "I didn't mean to cause any harm." But you did, Daniel said sharply, stepping forward. You tried to damage the reputation of two innocent boys. You wasted police resources. You filed a false report. And you manipulated a community for your personal vendetta. Her throat bobbed. I didn't know they were your kids. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel's eyes narrowed. That doesn't make this better. It makes it worse. One of the officers cleared his throat. Chief, based on the evidence, we're recommending charges for false reporting and property damage, potentially obstruction. Karen's voice cracked. Please, you don't have to do this. I was frustrated. They're always so loud. And I snapped. Daniel's stare was unrelenting. You didn't snap. You planned. You staged. You lied. She dropped to the bottom step, hands trembling. I'll delete the post. Apologize. Anything. You should have thought of that before involving law enforcement to punish kids over a basketball game, he said. The younger officer stepped forward. Ma'am, we'll need you to come with us to give a formal statement. Karen looked around, realizing every pair of eyes on the street was watching her fall. She took a step back, but there was nowhere left to run. For the first time, Karen Alder looked small, and Daniel Reyes. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He'd already made it clear. Justice had arrived. By the time Karen was led to the patrol car, her neighbors were already gathering. Some pretended to water plants. Others peeked through blinds. A few came right out to their porches, phones in hand, silently recording as the queen of neighborhood gossip took her long, humiliating walk of shame. Is that Karen? No way. She's getting arrested. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were a chorus. Karen's carefully constructed world, the one built on passive-aggressive notes, HOA complaints, and her weekly coffee gossip sessions, was unraveling faster than a dropped spool of thread. As the cruiser door shut behind her with a ka-chunk, Maya stood calmly with her boys. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply placed her hands on Ethan and Caleb's backs and gently guided them inside. But the neighborhood wasn't done talking. Within minutes, the group chat Karen once ruled had exploded. Screenshots of her fake photos circulated alongside clips from the front yard showdown. A neighbor named Tonya posted a video of the exact moment Chief Reyes called her out. You didn't snap. You planned. You staged. You lied. The video had 300 views in under an hour. Someone else posted a throwback, Karen yelling at kids for skateboarding too loudly. Another dug up an old rant she'd made about those kids always ruining the neighborhood vibe. Now those kids were heroes. Mia's phone buzzed non-stop with messages from neighbors. I always knew she was shady. Your boys are amazing. So sorry you went through that. Can we bring over a pie or something? Inside, Daniel had removed his jacket and wrapped Ethan and Caleb in a fierce hug. He looked them both in the eye. I'm proud of you. You stayed calm. You did nothing wrong. Ethan swallowed. Are we gonna be on YouTube? Daniel chuckled. Probably. Mia, meanwhile, sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through Karen's now silent social media pages. Her once busy profile was eerily quiet. Posts deleted. Comments gone. Reputation obliterated. But what chilled Mia more was the realization that this could have worked. Had they not had cameras? Had the boys been alone? Had she not stood up? Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. You did everything right. Most people would have panicked. Mia looked up at him. I didn't have time to panic. She came after my kids. Across the street, Karen's house looked smaller, duller. The white fence no longer sparkled. The gnome, what was left of it, lay in the trash. For years, Karen had manipulated fear to get what she wanted. But now, she was the cautionary tale. Karen sat in the small interrogation room, the harsh fluorescent lights overhead casting an unflattering glow. She had spent the last 2 hours pacing, her hands clammy, and her mind spiraling. No matter how many times she told herself she could fix this, it only seemed to get worse. The arresting officer had already read her rights, but the words felt distant, almost meaningless now. She had been so certain that her plan would work, that her story would be believed, that she could control the narrative, like she had done so many times before. But now, all the control was slipping through her fingers. Her lawyer, a slick-looking man in his early 40s, was on the phone, pacing just outside the door. He hadn't looked at her once since they arrived. The silence between them was unbearable. Every tick of the clock felt like a hammer pounding on her skull. She had thought this would just be a small confrontation, a quick move to get those boys in trouble so they'd finally leave her alone. But now it was a public spectacle, a scandal. Her name plastered on news sites, community pages, and social media. Her reputation, everything she had worked so hard to build, was gone. The officer who had taken her in walked into the room. He placed a file on the table, sliding it toward her. "You've been charged with false reporting, obstruction of justice, and vandalism. The chief of police is pressing for full charges. You'll likely be facing a court appearance in a few days." Karen's eyes widened. She had always believed her life would go on the same, quiet, controlled, without any real consequences. But now she was staring at the legal ramifications of her own actions, and they were worse than she ever imagined. "You're looking at jail time," the officer continued, his tone blunt, cold. "If you cooperate, it might be reduced to community service. But there's no getting around the fact that you lied to law enforcement and damaged someone's property. Not to mention the public backlash. Your social media is being flooded with negative comments. People are calling you a bully." Karen slumped back in her chair. This wasn't just about the boys anymore. This was about her whole life coming undone. Her neighbors were disgusted. Her friends were turning away. And the community that once supported her now looked at her with disdain. Her lawyer finally came in, phone still in hand, and shot her a look. "Karen, we need to talk about damage control. This isn't just a legal issue anymore. Your career, your reputation, it's all going down with this." Karen felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I wanted them to stop. And in doing so, you've destroyed everything you built." The lawyer's voice was sharp, his patience clearly wearing thin. Karen's mind raced. This was the moment she realized there was no turning back. Everything she'd done to manipulate, to control, to make her neighbors obey her had all collapsed in on itself. She had tried to destroy a family to protect her own fragile comfort, and in the process, she had destroyed her own. Outside the station, the world was still turning. People were still talking about her, but she could feel the walls closing in. The worst part, she knew it was her own fault. The courtroom was eerily quiet. The wooden paneling, the rows of seats, the judge's gavel, it all felt like a formality now. Karen Alder sat at the defendant's table, a shell of the confident woman she once was. The same courtroom she had walked into many times as a community member, someone who had tried to control every situation, every narrative, now felt like a cage. Her lawyer had tried to salvage what was left of her reputation, but there was no coming back from this. The judge called the court to order, and the proceedings began. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, the tension palpable. Karen could hear the murmurs from the audience, people who had once nodded in agreement with her every word, now watching her with judgment. Mia and Daniel Rice sat in the front row, hand in hand. Ethan and Caleb were beside them, their expressions calm but resolute. They had no fear anymore. They had fought for their truth, and now it was time to watch justice unfold. The prosecutor stood up, his voice cutting through the air. "Your Honor, we present irrefutable evidence that Karen Alder falsified accusations against two innocent minors. She intentionally manipulated video footage and staged the scene to make it appear as though they had vandalized her property. Not only did she waste police resources with a false report, but she also attempted to destroy the reputation of an entire family. Karen's heart raced. The evidence, screenshots, video clips, timestamps, was all there. Everything she had done was on display for everyone to see. The prosecutor continued, "We also have testimony from the chief of police, Daniel Reyes, who was personally involved in the investigation. The defendant's actions were premeditated, and she knowingly used her position in the community to bully and harass these children. For this, she should be held accountable." Karen's hands gripped the sides of her chair, her knuckles white. The weight of the prosecutor's words hung heavily in the air. She felt exposed, like there was no place left to hide. It wasn't just about the charges, it was about everything she had lost. The defense lawyer stood up, trying to salvage whatever shred of dignity remained. "Your Honor, my client regrets her actions. She is willing to make amends and is deeply sorry for the harm she caused. She never intended for things to escalate to this point. But the damage was done." The room felt smaller now, and Karen could feel the eyes of every person in the courtroom on her. She had lost everything. As the judge deliberated, Karen's gaze shifted toward the Reyes family. Daniel's steady presence was like an anchor, his hand still resting gently on Ethan's shoulder. Mia met her eyes briefly, and Karen could have sworn she saw something in her gaze, something unexpected. It wasn't just triumph, it was compassion. The judge returned to the bench, and the room fell silent. "Karen Alder," the judge began, "you have been found guilty of making false reports, obstructing justice, and vandalism. For these crimes, I hereby sentence you to 1 year of community service and a fine. Additionally, you will be required to make a public apology to the Reyes family and the community for your actions." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The fine was steep, and the community service would require her to work alongside those she had once tried to control. Karen's head swam. This wasn't the punishment she had expected. It wasn't jail time, but it was worse. Her status, her reputation, everything she had built, had been ripped away. And now she would spend the next year facing the consequences of her choices, working with the very people she had tried to harm. She caught a glimpse of Mia once more. There was no smug smile, no satisfaction, just a quiet resolve, the kind of strength that came from knowing the truth, and knowing it would always be enough. As the courtroom emptied, Karen stood alone. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered, and she could hear the whispers start again. This time, though, she didn't try to fight it. She had lost. And Mia, she had won in the way that mattered most, by standing up for her family, her kids, and what was right.